Good morning. Yeah, it's early in the morning here. It's 7:41. The sun's only been up for what 30 minutes. I've actually been up. Oh gosh, almost 3 hours now. I woke up about 5 o'clock, so here I am, feeling a little woozy because this week I have been imbibing a little too much, and boy, I'm feeling and especially yesterday after I got off from work, I went and had a couple of like brutally strong Bloody Marys for brunch. And then I drove back here. I felt fine driving back. It wasn't like I was woozy or anything. But when I got back here, I had to take a nap. And I was probably out for about an hour and a half. And then went and had coffee with a friend. I mean, I really did have coffee. Not just, we went for coffee. No, I actually did have a cup of coffee. And then I came back here and I wrote some and then finished off the evening with a pizza and a glass of wine. So I'm living large. Yeah, I was actually drinking wine right before I went to bed, which was not a good idea. I kind of still feel it this morning, so I have to take it easy. I'm going out. I'm leaving actually in about 3 hours with a friend. We're going to go do something. So, and my hair. There we go. See, ladies, when you have a problem with your hair part, you gotta mess with your hair. Me, I just pull the wig back into place. Uh, just pull the wig back into place. I wrote about 700 words last night, and it's really been interesting because this is the third night I worked on this particular scene. The first night I wrote 400 words. It was like 399. The next night I wrote 550, or right around there. And then last night I wrote just about 700 words. So it's like I'm increasing in 150 word increments toward my goal of finishing it. So if I go and write today, I should write 850 words. Should. Maybe I'll do a little bit more. It's kind of an important scene. I mean, you saw the beginning of it yesterday if you read the excerpt, and it's important because Irwin actually says something in this scene which has been on a lot of people's minds for a while, and she puts a voice to it. She actually comes right out and says something. So it's kind of an important milestone, and it's going to end on, the scene will end on a high note. Right now it's kind of on a bummer note, and it'll end on a high note. It'll end with fun. No, it really will. It'll end with fun. It's going to take the kids like 4 or 5 scenes to um, get back to Salem, and then they actually are going to meet up with the B levels, and it's going to be party time. And like I said, that's when you're going to get to see the kitchen, and you're going to learn something rather important about the kitchen. And you'll actually learn something rather important about several of the facilities around Salem. It's kind of unusual. And I started thinking about it, and it was like, yeah, it makes sense. You would actually do something like this. So, but a really interesting thing is, the last week or so, one of the upcoming scenes in the book, current book, has to do with Carrie going and seeing Professor Ellison about the equipment he wants to use for the 2014 Astara. You know, the Astara he's going to perform while he's a sea level. He's already thinking about it. And this is one of the things he says. I've been thinking about this over the summer. And he tells Professor Ellison that he wants to use a rather modern piece of keyboard equipment, which is known as a workstation. And a workstation is really, it's a, sorry, I'm sweating my butt off. It's a type of keyboard that can actually be used as a composition tool. You use it you can play stuff on it just like a regular synthesizer. And it has all these different voices and engines that you can go to. the one that Carrie's looking at has this fabulous piano engine. So he can play like any kind of piano he wants. And that's basically what he's telling Professor Ellison is he wants to scale back his performances this year to stick to something a little simpler, but he wants to use two keyboards, one to replicate a piano sound and or a synthesizer sound, and then another one on top to replicate an organ and a synthesizer for what he's looking to do. So he even mentions that he's moving away from working with the old equipment. It was really cool that he got to play with a 40-year-old synthesizer. It's really kind of cool. But that's not the direction he wants to go in. It's nice to play that old stuff once in a while, but you got to learn the new tech, and that's what he's getting into. So I had to do all this research. I've been doing a lot of research on different types of keyboards, on different types of workstations. And not only did I have to look to see what they can do, but I had to see if they were available in like the summer of 2013. That's the thing. I'm working in a time frame that was 3 years ago. So when you're working in an older time frame, you have to go, well, I can't use this keyboard if it hasn't been built yet. That's kind of it's kind of a paradox. I can't use that keyboard if it hasn't been built yet. So that's one of the things. And I've picked out the two keyboards that he's going to use. I've actually listened to a few demo tapes. Demo videos, actually. I shouldn't say demo tapes. Demo videos on what they sound like and what you can do with them. And Carrie's finally getting into a situation with composition, because one of the things that you can do with a workstation is you can play these sounds that are actually either built into your system, or you can pull them in like you're using a MIDI controller from a server, through your MIDI port, so that it's right there and you can do what you want with it. And then you can alter and save the composition off, and then upload it to a computer. Which they use for additional modeling. And then you can actually load that sample. Once you've created the sample to sound the way you want it, you can load it back down to the keyboard and store it, or you can load it off to a storage server and just play it that way. So he's looking at getting the proper sound by getting something that sounds close to what he wants to get, and then resampling it and modifying it, and then using that to play. So he's starting to branch up into technical composition at this point. He's learning how to use the tech, and that's what he actually tells Professor Ellison. I want to learn how to use this tech, so next year, if I want to do something big and impressive, I know exactly how to do it. It's a smart thing. And at the same time, because it's brought up in the scene, I'm going over all these scenes in my head all the time. So it's brought up in this scene that I'm checking something here. There we go. I hate it. I want to sneeze and I can't. But it's brought up in the scene that Nadine has already been down. Nadine Woodson has already been down, and she saw these two really boss keyboard controllers, and she reserved them both. And Professor Ellison tells Carrie, one of them is for you, because the moment she saw it, Carrie is going to want this keyboard. And so I had to think about what equipment she's using, because she actually likes another brand of equipment. Carrie likes one particular type of equipment brand because he thinks it's really good. Nadine likes another type of keyboard brand, and I figured out which three. She's actually using three keyboards that she's going to use. She's using the same type of workstation that Carrie is using, and she's going to use hers like a piano as well. And then she's using above that a MIDI workstation, MIDI keyboard controller, which is essentially you tie into a server that's got all these sounds and samples on them, and you can actually tie into multiple servers, and then figure out which sounds you want, and you control the server through the keyboard. It's essentially, instead of storing all the sounds inside your platform, you're actually pulling them from somewhere else. And then over here on her left, she actually has a rather big, powerful synthesizer, digital / analog sampler that I was listening to videos of that this morning going, wow, yeah, that's the sort of device that Nadine would want to work with. So, yeah. Like I said, it's fun. This is the kind of research I do, and I find it very interesting because, well, if you haven't figured it out by now, I'm really into keyboards. I'm really into like synthesizers and equipment and stuff like that. I have this great interest. Wow, look at my hair. Great interest in this stuff. It's almost like Carrie and I are the same person. Go figure. But Carrie is getting the right idea, and I'm sort of looking at it the same way. You can look nostalgically back on all this equipment that I grew up with, like organs and mellotrons and Moog synthesizers, Moog analog synthesizers that had tons of patch cords. Patch cord, if you're not familiar with what that is, think of the old telephone operator boards where when an operator would connect you, she'd pull a cord out and she'd jam it in to an area so that you could make the physical connection. Well, the old Moog synthesizers, the really big ones, big analog synthesizers, they had patch cords all over them, and you could recreate different sounds by setting up these patch cords. It was always generally felt that only the best and craziest musicians ever took that equipment out on the road, because the road had a tendency to really screw up your stuff. It screwed it up really bad. But that's one of the reasons why nearly everything is digital nowadays. Even the quote analog synthesizers generally have their analog samplers, and the keyboards are modified in such a way that you can actually modify the analog sound, but it's really kind of like a digital sample that sounds analog. One of the keyboards that Nadine is using, they even talk about that they sampled off all these original sounds from the original keyboards, because there's always going to be one or two of them around in storage, and then they go off and they sample the sounds from these keyboards, and that's what you're actually playing. It sounds like an Oberheim from the 1980s, but it's a digital sample of the Oberheim sound. And it's the same thing that happened in the B-level novel. Carrie was playing off of a mellotron. The mellotrons they have nowadays, there's actually three different types of mellotrons. There's the one that's on the stand, like Carrie was playing, that looks like the old traditional mellotron. And then there's one that looks like a keyboard controller that has the sounds in it, and you can stack it on top of another keyboard, or you can put it on a performance stand, and it's nice. Or you can just buy all the mellotron sounds and put them in a server and throw it in a rack, and then just run a MIDI cord into a keyboard controller. So that becomes your mellotron. So when Carrie was playing these mellotron samples, he was actually playing digital samples, but the Mellotron Corporation actually got all their old Mellotrons out of storage, the ones they had, because again, they always keep, versions of this stuff, or they find some a collector who actually has one, and they resampled all of the original Mellotron sounds, so that when you've got your Mellotron switched over to say Mellotron Mark II, you're actually playing the same sound that you could play on a Mellotron Mark II. And it's much easier that way because every musician that had a Mellotron in the 1970s hated them. The way the original Mellotron worked, a little bit of history here, I'm diverging. The way the original Mellotron worked was that it had tapes inside the box, the cabinet, so that when you pressed a key, the tape started spinning. It was like tape playback, and that's what would produce like the orchestral sound or a choir sound or flutes, horns, that sort of thing. The bands that use those the most, Yes used them. Rick Wakeman actually had two Mellotrons, and there's a reason for that, and I'll explain why. And then, of course, Yes had, well, he was with Yes, so Yes had them. Moody Blues, of course, their signature orchestral sound was done with Mellotrons. Genesis, of course, their signature sound. In fact, one of their signature sounds is even a package offered by the Mellotron Corporation, Watcher of the Skies. When you go in, and that's the sound that Tony Banks reproduced on his Mellotron Mark II that just happens to be in the keyboard room at my school, at the School of Salem. Interesting how that happened. That's the infamous Black Bitch. And there's a reason for that, because it just, everybody hated that Mellotron. The guy who owned it before Tony Banks, the keyboard player for King Crimson, was the one who actually nicknamed it that, and he said it was because it was such a temperamental piece of equipment. And Tony Banks said the same thing. I could only use it for like a couple of years, and then I had to get rid of it because it was just a pain in the ass to work with. One of the problems you ran into with the Mellotron was, in a studio environment, they were great because studios controlled environment. They keep them air conditioned because the equipment puts off an enormous amount of heat. So you want to keep everything nice and cool. It keeps the guitars in tune, which is important. Nothing's getting out of whack. And then you go out into the real world with this equipment, and the environment just starts screwing everything up. If it's too hot or too cold, your guitars are going out of tune constantly. Wind can affect how you play, stuff like that. It's blowing on microphones, it's blowing on pickups, so it's causing distortion. And for keyboards, moisture, humidity always used to affect analog synthesizers. The moisture would get on the circuits and start doing weird stuff. But the Mellotron was the worst. When Tony Banks would set up with Genesis, he had to make certain that precautions were actually taken to make certain they didn't light the Mellotron with the stage lights too much, because the inside of the cabinet would get hot. And when the inside of the cabinet would get hot, the tapes would stretch. And he related several stories about how, normally when you're in a studio and you're playing it and I'm pressing the keys and it's like, like that. And he gets on stage, and of course the tapes have all gotten soft and stretchy and everything, and it's like while he's playing. And you just, as a musician, you're dying up there if your equipment is screwing up on you. Which is why when he was able to move to the EM emulator, which was essentially one of the first digital samplers that could reproduce a Mellotron sound, he did not hesitate to go to that. He said, "I do not look back on any of my old equipment with any sort of fondness." When new technology came along, boom, I was there. I just went for it because there was no point in keeping, hanging on to your 15-year-old Mellotron or your 12-year-old Moog synthesizer with a dozen patch cords. You just went with the newest technology. Good old Mellotron. Rick Wakeman set one on fire because it jacked up on him in the middle of a show, and they couldn't pull it out because he was a stacker. He would stack his keyboards on top of one another, and there was like a couple of keyboards sitting on top of the Mellotron, so it's not like, hey, come swap this out, guys, in the middle of a show. No, so afterwards, him and some roadies hauled it out back, kicked it off a loading dock, doused it in petrol, and set it aflame. Which again shows you how much money he had, because back then in $1970, that was about $3,000 he lit up. And famously, Keith Emerson never played a Mellotron. He was all organs, piano, synthesizer, clavinet. And he was going to play a Mellotron for one show just so he could get kind of used to it, because people were always telling him, you need to use one of these, Keith, you're going to love it. And he hit the keys, and the Mellotron, the tapes were soft and was like that, and he flipped out and just kicked it off the stage into the orchestra pit where they were playing, because they used to play a lot of the amphitheaters and stuff back in the 1970, 71. And so you had orchestra pits because they were the old English, music halls and stuff like that. And he just kicked it into the orchestra pit, and that was it. He never touched another Mellotron his entire life. Just would not. If I can't sample the sound, if I can't reproduce it on a synthesizer, screw it. I don't want it. So there you go. Most of this has been Cassidy's Keyboard History 101. Maybe this is something that Professor Ellison's going to teach this year. Actually, he's going to teach art, beginning art. So Carrie's going to learn how to draw. Yeah, the two new classes that the kids have, art with Professor Ellison and delineation with Professor Arrakis. Yes, that's actually going to be a lot of fun. Needless to say, Professor Arrakis is not like Professor Trelawney. She's not going to walk around with a crystal ball going, "Oh, see into the vapors." She'll probably put the entire class in a trance and see what the hell they see, which is entirely possible. She may do the tea trick with all the kids, and the only ones in her class who are going to know about that are Annie and Carrie, because they've already had it done a couple of times to them. So you never know. Deanna may do the tea trick with them. Hey kids, how about some tea? I had a vision that I was eaten by my cat. No, that wasn't. You were still awake. But that's entirely possible. She knows not everyone has the spark of divination. It's a very rare thing to develop. So, and then of course she's going to be teaching Annie and Carrie special things, like how to astral walk, how to astral project. Boy, those kids, they're going to be busy. So busy. It's going to be fun. I've already worked out their schedules, of course, a while back. And the comments are all going to be that it doesn't matter that you're actually taking fewer classes now than you did the year before. You're going to find you have actually less time. Boy, damn it. These kids just don't get time for themselves. I mean, you think about it, Carrie basically has stuff going on 7 days a week. Once you get to racing season, it's like classes Monday through Saturday, and then racing on Monday through Friday, and then racing on Saturday, and then Sunday he and Annie got, advanced self-defense. So Carrie's going 7 days a week. Annie is essentially going 7 days a week, because there's stuff that she can do while Carrie's preparing for a race. If he's got to go down after lunch and, have lunch down at the clubhouse before they have a team meeting, In the morning she can go off and be working down in the Black Vault or something like that. So these kids, it's 7 days a week for them. They're not getting a whole hell of a lot of downtime. You gotta feel sorry for them. They're only 13 years old. Well, Annie's gonna be 14. Yeah, she turns 14 this year. But yeah, it's a pain in the butt. And that's one of the things that comes up. Now, starting in the D level, that's going to get scaled back just a little bit, but they're still, busy as hell. The C levels are considered the hardest. You're by the time you finish your C levels, you're halfway through school. And if you can get through the A, B, and C levels pretty well, the chances are good you could still get cut, but you have a far better chance of making it to graduation than you did, say, as an A level. Yeah, so it's going to be a hard novel to write because there's going to be a lot of pain, both physical, mental, emotional. These kids are going to get jacked severely. My poor kids. They are. They're just going to get jacked around so bad. I feel so sorry for them. No, I don't. I'm writing this shit. I know exactly what I'm doing. Yeah, I feel sorry for you kids until I hit you with a fireball or I throw zombies at you or, something like that. Or I put you in a situation where, it's once more life and death. You gotta love it. They wouldn't. I'd be hated. I'm like the George R.R. Martin of my little world. Don't get too used to these kids. Well, Annie and Carrie probably aren't going to die. Probably. They probably aren't going to die, but they're going to suffer. Oh, are they going to suffer? I'm laughing gleefully about this. I wonder if, JRRM, when he's writing some stuff, if he's laughing gleefully about, when I kill this bitch, it's going to be so much fun. Yeah, it's possible. Some people don't take any pride in that. Some people, it hurts them. Of course, I still love the meme where, J.K. Rowling is going about, I had to kill Fred, I had to kill Lupin, I had to kill Tonks. It made me feel so bad. It was so difficult. It was so hard. And he flipped to the picture of George R.R. Martin going, oh, you're so precious. Yeah. Yeah. Don't talk to me about killing off 3 characters, honey. I did that in the last chapter. I don't think I'll get that bad. I mean, I've already killed 6 students and a teacher. Actually, I killed more than that. I killed, 10 students and a teacher? And Carrie saw 2 of them die. And then he almost died twice, maybe 3 times. Yeah, and Emma nearly died twice. You gotta wonder if Emma still has nightmares. If she wakes up sometimes and thinks that she's being smothered by a gigantic hungry octopus, and you better hope her sister never finds out that she was almost eaten by an abomination, because that little brat will be sneaking into Emma's room with like a squid plushie in the middle of the night and start dangling the tentacles over her sister's face while she sleeps. And then, of course, Emma will come out of it, probably pee herself and be screaming and everything else, and then get up and throw off a spell and murder her sister. Never wake up a witch like that. Can be bad. Well, I've rambled on about 30 minutes now. Got almost 15 seconds ago, so I think it's a good time to say I'm done. I won't bore you anymore. But I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed my little history lesson. And I'll be back next Saturday. Yeah, I'll be back. Bye.